Asia was opened up to the Volksreich by 1600, Volkish explorers led by Grundar Jonasson having risked life and limb around the Cape of Good Hope to reach it. In fact, Captain Jonasson himself died on the voyage, having been cast overboard the side of his ship, the Unbezwingbar, by a vicious storm. As such, on the 25th of April, Kaiser Ivo commissioned a map of the known world in his honor, which would come to be called the Jonasson Cartographia, the most detailed map yet penned. Along the right-hand border was collected a series of nations and their national standards or flags, ranked according to their perceived power on the world stage. This was considered to be the beginning of the Great Powers, whose ranks would morph and change as the centuries progressed. These great powers were listed from most to least significant as the Volksreich, the Magyarország, Aquitania, Russia, the Ming, the Aksu, Ifriqiya, and Likandu. Beginning in Europe, the map depicts solid, clearly defined imperial realms. Ireland had become total master of the British Isles under the so-called red-haired Emperor Dara Vogan. Aquitania, under their Emperor Philippe II Croylon, a dynasty traced back to Hoel the Shrewd in 1221, had now grown rich in the sugar trade, utilizing slaves purchased from their recent enemy Ifriqiya to work the Caribbean plantations. The Volksreich, under Kaiser Ivo von Bauer, still dominated the center of Europe, even despite a slow retreat of its borders. The Magyarország, under Emperor Andor van Kura, was thrashing about in Europe, a great empire bursting with energy, looking to explode forth from it and join in the colonial scramble. It translated this unfulfilled ambition into militarization and Magyarization, forcefully terraforming their population to become more Magyar and less foreign in every way, including state-sponsored pogroms against various groups such as Bulgarians, Greeks, and Jews. Russia, under Tsar Nikolai of Vladimir, was quietly creeping eastward, its frontiersmen planting crosses as far east as Krasnoyarsk by this point, and they would not stop until they reached the Pacific. Even the smaller European nations were global power brokers in 1600. For example, Alençon, under Roy Malo Victor Archambault, was the richest nation in Europe and indeed the world, boasting a healthy colonial empire and as such a vast hoard of silver. Iceland, under King Sverre Almer, was in the throes of a decades-long civil war between Catholicism and Protestantism. These circumstances allowed Russia to predate in their northern regions and conquer all the way to the North Sea. Beyond that, it was largely a nation of the old ways, raiding and going on North Sea voyages in old ships to find honor and death on the field of battle. Kiev, under Tsar Yefimy Oblonskaya and Patriarch Proarch, was a regional power and theocracy, truly a holy kingdom of Gnostic belief personified, resistant to all attempts at conquest. Finally, Ifriqiya, under Imperator Alexios Musuros, was a mercantile powerhouse, driving the triangle trade across the Atlantic faster than it could ever otherwise go. Ifriqiyan sailors were unmatched in all the known world for their guile and skill, and as such, this nation of merchants had successfully provided the material prerequisites to fling Europe into the 17th century, the rest of the world lagging behind. Speaking of the rest of the world, the New World was still largely unexplored. The Yusufids were attempting to relocate to their colony of La Plata, the Irish were settling the eastern coast of Brazil and held all of Florida, Alençon lorded over Colombia, the Volksreich held Panama and Cuba, Ifriqiya was colonizing Texas, Aquitania held the Antilles, and was also in the process of colonizing Newfoundland. The Middle East was a conflagration of conflict, sorely disunited. The Kandu was the most stable, but they focused themselves solely against Europe and the powers thereof. The Fatimid Empire was attempting to reconstitute itself, though Sogd, Al-Kufa, and Ale-Ferdos, and the Ashrafids were making that rather difficult. As such, they had joined the colonial game from the Persian Gulf, colonizing the Moluccas in Oceania. Among the mess in the Middle East, the Aksu were snapping up land as fast as their bandit hordes were able, and in some ways began to resemble their long-gone Mongol Khanate when they conquered the Punjab from the Fatimids. Asia was also characterized by empire, with Ming under Emperor Wanli, Korea under Emperor Shinmu Seonggi, and Japan under Emperor Yi Gosei. Secondary powers in the region included the Oirat, Kham, Ayutthaya, Ava, and Brunei, all tributaries of the Ming Emperor. India proved an exception, with the Kanyakubids, Bahmanis, Bengal, and Madura providing some resistance in the Paschemi Dal, where the kingdoms of the subcontinent banded together against the far-reaching influence of the Ming. Oceania was the domain of several Hindu kingdoms, namely the Vijayanagar, Malacca, and Pasai, though the Fatimids in the Moluccas and Shibans in Australia were making their Islamizing mark. Meanwhile, Africa was still somewhat underutilized by European colonization, though this would not be the case for long. Ifriqiya held their northern dominion, though the wily Bedouins of the Jared Sultanate had broken free of their control. The Yusufids were trying to colonize South Africa as well, a kind of backup if La Plata failed them. The tribal confederation of Mali was conquering its neighbors in a supposed attempt to amass enough power to oust Ifriqiya and prevent its people from being taken as slaves, but the chiefdoms of Yao, Oyo, and Kanem were still all too happy to do business with the Africans, dealing largely in human goods for gunpowder to fight the growing Mali. The Arabs were largely in control of East Africa, from Egypt down to Mombasa. Beyond that, Betsimi Saraka in Madagascar was the only other chiefdom that came close to Mali's relative regional power. In 1601, in the Magyarország city of Naxos, Pope Felix IX convened a council to reform Catholicism, and thus launched the Counter-Reformation. Pope Felix IX targeted several areas of Catholicism, specifically the major complaints made by Arneson the monk. Felix IX officially banned indulgences, as well as beginning to root out corruption and produce church-approved Vulgate Bibles for the reading of Catholics in their native languages, instead of whatever wild interpretations Arneson had since put out. Felix IX wasn't completely nonviolent at the Diet of Naxos, however. It was at this gathering that he began the Inquisition, in order to ensure that those within the ranks of the Holy Mother Church were indeed who they said they were. This Inquisition would also be available for witch hunting, at the request of local lords. A few years later, Aquitania besieged the Yusufid city of Tarifa, which crumbled in under a week. As such, in February of 1605, the reconquête was finally complete, and in the same month that it was declared nearly 400 years ago. Thousands made the grueling and desperate journey to La Plata. However, the luck of the final Iberian Moors got even worse when, in 1618, the Yusufids had been expelled from La Plata by Alençon, Colombia, and those final survivors fled to the Cape of Good Hope, a people truly and totally in exile. Those few who decided to risk returning to the fractured nightmare that was the Middle East, attempting to sail to the Ashrafids or the Fatimid remnant or even Lakandu, were all captured without fail by African slavers, total masters of the Mediterranean. These people would indeed reach the Middle East, but in chains. A scant few, usually those who resisted, were sent to the sugar, tobacco, and rum plantations of Alençon, Ireland, and Afriqiya, respectively. On the 29th of December, 1618, Alençon explorers were the first to circumnavigate the globe. Making the journey in 99 days, they lost over half their ships and their captain, Stefan Dracule, who died en route due to an injury from a poisoned arrow. However, their sacrifice led to a truly auspicious day for the Kingdom of Alençon. In 1623, Alençon, Colombia blocked Volkish expansion further into South America, leaving Volkish explorers to head to North America, specifically the region of Louisiana. Here, Volkish explorers attempted to begin farming cash crops on a greater scale, competing with Ifriqiya and Ireland in the tobacco trade. On the 29th of October, 1624, Kaiser Erhard III rose to the throne. Erhard III was truly a man of the age, driven by an exploratory and entrepreneuring spirit, girded by stubbornness and wit. He would double the ships in the Volkish fleet for the express purpose of placing the world squarely in his palm. Though he was not a religious man, and he did this for his own pride, he also felt constrained by old customs, and only desired the best men to serve under his employ. By 1635, the Declaration of Indulgence was signed into law, and thus there was an explosion of religious diversification and even resultant humanist thought, much to the chagrin of the Church. As such, by 1647, Volkish colonization was doing rather well, between America, Mexico, Cuba, and Volkish Colombia. The empire was growing fast. The natives were treated well and seen as economic partners, largely due to the spread of new humanist ideas throughout the Volksreich, though easy profit was a motive. By 1663, however, when Kaiser Norbert II rose to the throne, this situation had begun to change. The plantations of the Volkish colonial empire could no longer be worked by indentured servants, and began to use prisoners as slaves due to poor access to other sources of human stock. Though this also proved not enough manpower to compete in the wider market with the other imperial crowns of Europe. As such, more people came to live in the New World. The neighboring Caddo tribe, shut out from trade with the Volksreich due to previously established agreements with a rival tribe of theirs, decided to launch a night attack on the region of Volkish Louisiana. They raided the area in the thousands, stealing away the wealth they thought that they were entitled access to, like rum, tobacco, and hundreds of livestock. 2,300 Volkish people died during the Caddo raid, and so it was also during that time that the Volkish colonialists entered into their first aggressive interaction with the natives through their total conquest of the belligerent Caddo tribe. They came with the sunrise, armed to the teeth, and sent what was left of them fleeing north. Kaiser Norbert would officially change the native policy in response to this, while also slowing colonial expansion in the Americas for better opportunities closer to home. In 1666, the Volksreich began colonial projects in Africa, specifically the region of Cameroon. This colony struggled to make itself profitable, though by the export of ivory and animal pelts, they were able to at least pay for its maintenance. In 1675, the Irish discovered hot chocolate, becoming the most valuable product that year. With all the goods from the New World entering the Volkish economy, the first stock exchanges were built in Denmark, trading mostly in foods and spices. By 1682, the Yusufids were also expelled from South Africa by the neighboring colony of Magyar, South Africa, which beat them in a quick and decisive war. The remaining Yusufids were thusly set adrift, settling various islands like the island of St. Helena. Their only continental holding was on the most western edge of Africa, coexisting with Mali, where they acted as advisors and commanders for their tribal bands. Meanwhile, Volkish America decided to annex the Chickasaw, given it would double the colony's size and allow for greater expansion east, as well as securing a good portion of the Mississippi River. In 1694, after an attempted invasion by Lakandu, the Magyarország retaliated and took Constantinople. This was perhaps the grandest symbolic gesture which marked the zenith of early colonial expansion and harkened centuries of Europe's place on top of the world.